Welcome to Russia's World, where you will hear prominent voices, psychoanalysts, psychologists, therapists, philosophers, and thought leaders talk about a variety of mental health concerns and problems, including how to deal with anxiety, depression, and chronic conditions, and how to become more resilient, find inner peace, be emotionally engaged in your personal and professional life, and just be your beautiful, authentic self. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Arash's World. Today we have a special guest. We have Les Carroll. How are we doing today?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thank you. So my first question is the toughest one, especially I would think in your case. How would you briefly describe yourself to our audience here? What would you say?
I don't know. I'm a pretty regular guy. I had a 28-year Air Force military career. It was going about about like normal, average, and then late in my career, I decided to start. Volunteering for deployments. Ended up in Afghanistan a couple of times. Ended up serving at the Air Force Mortuary at Dover Air Force Base for 4 months. Found myself right in the middle of some amazing, kind of what became historical events, and a otherwise good, average, solid career became kind of an extraordinary career because of that last 5 years.
Yeah, I would not say regular or ordinary. Let me just say what I've written down. You were in the Air Force, Air National Guard member, journalist, documentary filmmaker, author, as well as now novelist.
Yes.
That's true.
And most importantly, I'm a husband and father and a grandfather.
That too, absolutely. And thank you for mentioning that. That's always important to add. So I want to talk mainly about here your book, your novel. It's not a novel, Last Day on the Blue Wonder. What would you say about it?
Last Day on the Blue Wonder, I think, is maybe the best writing that I've done, my best written novel. It just it came out of just a passion for being on the water and fishing and that kind of thing. I was with my wife on vacation in September, October of 2023. We were on what we called our Maine trip, Maine being the state. And we started out in Boston, went to a game at Fenway Park. And so kind of checked off that box off my bucket list. And then we went up to Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I was a big fan of the show Wicked Tuna. And so I was chasing around the Wicked Tuna boats like a little kid, like, there's that boat, there's that boat. Oh, look, there's the fat tuna, there's the hot tuna. And I was doing that. And then I had already written one book, and I had another book coming out. And I said to my wife, I'm going to come up with an idea for a novel because I want a good reason to come back here over and over. And now I've been back to Gloucester 3 times. And Boston 3 times, and now I've gone to 3 games at Fenway Park. I've gone to more games at Fenway Park.
Also, so you have your book that you just mentioned. The previous book was This Troubled Ground, right? And that was inspired by true events. My question is this novel inspired by true events as well?
Last Day on the Wonder is more just a straight fictional story. I mean, it's the characters are definitely inspired by true events, true people. I wanted to create strong military characters. I know that there were a few women that are Silver Star recipients from Iraq and Afghanistan for battlefield bravery, and so I said I'm going to create a character just like that. A strong, courageous woman to be the main female character, and then the main male character was an Army Ranger, hard-charging, hard-fighting Army Ranger.
So, and your novel again, Last Day on the Blue Wonder, it does include references to Afghanistan as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, the story begins on an Afghanistan battlefield, where the 2 main characters meet, so to speak, although one of them is unconscious, and the main character is very severely wounded. The other character is a medic, and she basically saves his life on the battlefield. and then 3 years later they reconnect, and that's what happens in the rest of the story is after they reconnect 3 years later.
Now, I do want to talk about Afghanistan too, because that's like such a crucial event globally, but also for you personally. I've having been there, and I've talked to Canadian members from the National Defense who were there, and they said like it's just like the fact that you're there in this situation and dealing with the locals was probably some of the toughest parts because they have to like there's a language barrier, there's a cultural barrier, and so on. And I was just on vacation in Iceland, and it's pretty much similar, but there are a few things that are different, right? They don't tip over there, and so it's like it's. I mean, this is really minor in comparison. What I want to say here. So, what were some of the things that stood out for you, both good and bad, being in Afghanistan?
I was just in Ireland, so I do understand the it's not that different than the U.S., but somewhat different. When I first got to Afghanistan, this was very interesting. I went to this conference about third or fourth day after I was there. I went to this conference at the Serena Hotel, which is a fancy hotel in Kabul. The difference between going there and going to a fancy hotel in the U.S. is you still had to worry about a suicide bomber coming in. I mean, there was still a lot of security. We were carrying weapons and had on body armor and everything. But we went to this, this fancy hotel, the Serena Hotel. And I thought, is this how my whole deployment's going to be? I thought I was going to be, out in the field and downrange and out in the combat zone. Here I am at a 5-star hotel. But that was only for about 3 days. Then I went back to the compound, and then I started traveling around the country and seeing Afghanistan and seeing the different cultures. And I mean, Afghanistan is an interesting place because if you're in Kabul and you're with young, educated Afghans, now this is the end of 2008, so we're talking, 18 years ago. You were young, educated Afghans. You were people who wanted freedom, who were smart, who were educated, who modernized. But I also got on a plane or took a convoy and went out downrange, as we called it, or out into villages where they live the same as they did 1,000 years ago. So, there's such a huge contrast between the city and being out in most of the rest of the country, being out in, up in upper Kabul province, where hasn't changed in 1,000 years probably. The difference being, there were at least things like wells and pumps and things like that the U.S. had come in and tried to build and install. But I mean, it was not unusual at all for an Afghan to come there with, buckets and get water out of this well and then carry the water, home to carry the water a mile or two back to their house that they got out of this well that, American engineers had installed, some years earlier.
And so what led you to write your previous book, This Troubled Ground? I mean, that is about the war in Afghanistan too. Is it some of your experiences there too?
Yeah, immediately when I got to Afghanistan at the end of 2008, I knew I was in a whole different world than what I would do, and I immediately started having these very, very fascinating experiences. First, from just getting there and being in a whole different place, being in a combat zone, driving through Kabul. I mean, just going right back to when I first got there. Landed at Bagram, got on a helicopter for Kabul International Airport. I am in this helicopter with two guys that might have been CIA operatives. I don't know what they are. They had on masks and they had weapons and all the stuff. They didn't say anything to me. I didn't say anything to them. And I immediately knew I was in like another world. And as I look up, and as I look out of the helicopter and we're flying from Bagram to Kabul, I see these villages and these compounds. And as I described it in the book, it looked like just this brown blanket, below us. But then we were low enough that we could see not villages. We could see villages too, but we could see these compounds and we could see people moving around and I just was like, what must it be like? What must that life be like? I couldn't even imagine. And then when we got there, as we're banking to land, I can see more behind me, and there's an Apache helicopter behind us, and that had been our escort the whole time. We had been escorted from Bagram to Kabul International Airport by an Apache attack helicopter. So landed, and if you remember that scene, like in Forrest Gump, and I think in Platoon, I think there was a couple movies where you land and get off the helicopter, and all of a sudden somebody just throws your bags out on the ground, and then the helicopter just takes off, and you're blinded, and you're what to do. That's kind of what happened.
Oh my God.
All these other two guys just disappeared so fast. I didn't even, they were gone. And so I'm standing there and the helicopter's still going. I'm kind of ducking down because I'm under the rope. All of a sudden, I had like 5 or 6 bags, because you take everything you're going to need. You take your chemical warfare gear that you put under the bed and you don't touch until you leave 6 months later. But I had 5 or 6 bags. And so they were all just thrown out on the ground. The helicopter takes off, and I'm just sitting there on this helicopter tarmac with all these bags, going like, what in the heck do I do now? Luckily, somebody drove up, said, "Hey, can I help you?" And he throws my stuff in his pickup truck and takes, and I jump in the back, and he takes me, to the terminal where I can find my ride to HQ ISAF. But I mean, that was just, that's just otherworldly. I mean, I'm just like, where am I? What have I done? Because I volunteered, so it wasn't like I had been there. I could have not been there. And then we get ready to get on a convoy to go back to go to HQ ISAF in Kabul, where I was posted. And this British corporal comes out and he starts giving us a briefing, and he has these 2 little toy cars, like little Hot Wheels we used to play with. And he says, this is our vehicle, this is the other vehicle. And he flips one over and he says, so if we're hit and our vehicle is disabled, and he kind of flips the little Hot Wheel car on its roof. And he says, if this vehicle is disabled, we're going to get out of it. We're all going to get into this vehicle, and we're going to just pile into this vehicle, and we're going to keep going. And I'm going like, okay, so if we're hit and our vehicle is on its, is upside down, we're going to all scramble out of that, and we're going to get into the other vehicle, so that
this is surreal. This is just surreal.
And of course that didn't happen, thankfully, but I'm looking out back of this this up armored vehicle, and I'm looking and I see the streets of Kabul, and I don't, it's like something that I couldn't even imagine. I mean, it was beautiful and scary and horrible, all in one. I mean, it was all of the above.
And I can't imagine the constant paranoia that you have, because in a conventional war, you know who the enemy are, and they're soldiers, and you fight. And this is like, could be anyone, right?
But I was so naive at that time. I didn't really know. I think my 9mm was still in the case, and the ammo was still like packed in my bag. I don't think I had even gotten it out, or I know I didn't have it out on the helicopter. Somebody might have straightened me out before we got on the convoy. But when I was on the helicopter and I was looking across at these 2 guys, and they were just weapons everywhere, handguns, long rifles, helmets, gear, weapons, everything. And I'm holding the little carrying case with my 9mm, and the ammo magazines are still packed in the thing, and I haven't even unlocked it and loaded it. So, I was pretty naive.
And so there's also the documentary that you're involved with, Bringing the Fallen Home. And I think that's, again, something very, very important too. What is that about? And what would you say about why did you decide to do a documentary as well, in addition to the book?
Okay. Let me just go back a little bit and lead right into that, because it's all basically connected. So, in Afghanistan, after I started having these unbelievable experiences, the Serena Hotel wasn't that unbelievable, because it was more like, it felt like going to a conference in, Chicago, except we were all, it was up armored vehicles getting there, weapons, body armor, all that. But I guess there were 2 really fancy hotels, the Intercontinental and that one in Kabul. And, so it wasn't that strange. But then I started going places, and I started doing stuff. And about a month after getting there, I went up to the German camp. There's a German camp called Camp Marmel, which was near Mazar-e Sharif. And I was walking across the camp at night, and I looked up and I think it was a full moon, stars, and I looked up and I went, man, I wonder if my family is seeing that same full moon, because they're a million miles away. I mean, they might as well be a million miles away. That's, and then I was like, how am I ever going to explain to them, things like this? Kind of like in Saving Private Ryan, when Captain Miller has that moment, where he says, how will I ever tell my wife about days like today? And I had that little line. I love lines from movies, and they're all in my books. And that rung in my head all the time. How will I tell my family about these experiences? And so I knew I was going to write a book eventually. And so after my first Afghanistan deployment, I was very restless. I didn't really want to go back to Afghanistan, but I wanted to keep staying involved with the quote unquote war effort. And I had bosses that were like, we can spare you from the day-to-day activities of the South Carolina National Guard. So they said, if you want to volunteer for do something else, okay. So the next thing was I get this call, and they said, would you like to go to the Air Force Mortuary at Dover Air Force Base and be the PAO? And I said, sure. And I didn't really know. I mean, I knew Dover, and I knew basically the return of the fallen and that process, but knew very little. And I had just watched the movie Taking Chance by Kevin Bacon, and they are I'm with Kevin Bacon. And they had told us to watch that movie before we got there. And so I just watched the movie. So I had somewhat of an idea what I was getting into. But again, I get there, we're there a few days. We do our first dignified transfer. We're on the ramp, plane taxis up, the back opens, and here comes, 2 or 3 flag draped transfer cases. We could hear families, crying, wind blowing, freezing cold. And again, that's one of those experiences like, you just can't imagine if you're not there, and it's hard to describe. And I had that same feeling. How am I going to tell my family what this is like? And so after 4 months there and having some incredible experiences, horrific experiences, but incredible just the same. A few years later, I went back to Afghanistan a second time. And then after that deployment, I got home, and that's when I started writing. And I retired immediately after. And it was in about the first 6 months to a year after that, I got pretty depressed. I mean, I wasn't suffering, I don't think, from, like severe PTSD, but I was going through that. I've done the most important thing I'll ever do in my life. What's left. I mean, I was 53 years old, and I'm like, now what am I going to do? I'll never have this much responsibility, or I'll never be doing anything this important. And I think that's very common in the military, and especially for combat people that have figuratively, occupied a foxhole with somebody and then they get home and they just don't know what that, you can't recreate that feeling of camaraderie and closeness and community. And I think that's why the suicide epidemic is so bad in the military, is because you can't go back and recapture that, I think, or it's hard to go back and recapture that. My good fortune was, as a writer, I could put it all down in a book. I went to a lot of therapy at the VA. I started writing, made the documentary film Bringing the Fallen Home, which when I was at Dover, I called this friend of mine, Cliff Springs, who was a friend who we had produced some stuff together, and Cliff's an amazing filmmaker. And I said, I got an idea for a documentary about this process, what we're doing up here. And I mean, I think by the time I got back to South Carolina, I already had the title Bringing the Fallen Home and what we did. And then so over the next, after that, I went back to Afghanistan and then retired. So it was about 4 years after I first made that phone call to him that we finally got the documentary made. And we took it to our local education television station. They took it to the distributor who distributed their national programming, and so it got distributed nationally on PBS, on public television. And I think it got into about 90% of the major markets across the country. And so that was an amazing experience. That's a documentary called Bringing the Fallen Home. It's you can watch it on YouTube. We finally, after many years, wrestled it kind of out of the public television proprietorship or whatever, and got it where we could put it on YouTube and make it available to the public free of charge.
There are two things that I think that's happening around the world, but especially here in North America too, is like the support for vets, right? I think that's something that it needs to be more from my experience, because these are, again, things that I can't even imagine, like, and the stress and the PTSD, as you're saying, that they have to go through, especially during war times. And the other one is respect for, again, people who are serving. Now, no matter if you agree with them politically or not, it doesn't matter. It's just the respect that they're willing to risk their lives. And then also the bravery of the families that you're talking about in the documentary, the pain and grief that they go through as well, right? And to respect that as well, because yes, they're all heroes.
Yeah, well, yes. And that's one of the things that really angers me now, because we don't have many combat fatalities, thank goodness. But when we do, and the president goes there, whoever the president is, whether it was President Biden and Trump and now our Trump, Biden, Trump again, the media just immediately turns it into a political show. If it's Biden, he's looking at his watch. If it's Trump, he's wearing a hat, and you completely forget what the whole reason why they're there, why they are there, which is because a U.S. service member or two or three or a dozen have fallen in combat, and their families are on that ramp grieving. And the media is the media is making it all about which president, what they did, and everything. And that has very much upset me very much. And I actually have been working on this this magazine article sort of about that. And I did it 107 times. And when the president goes, the one side of the media turns it into a negative. His side turns it into like this big major event, and it doesn't. It shouldn't be about the leadership. It should be about the soldier, sailor, airman, marine, their family members, and we've gotten away from that, and it very much angers me. And I'm not gonna hold back speaking out.
Good for you. Please do. Yeah. And I fully support that. Yeah.
And the different campaigns, and they boast about, this president went 2 times, this president went 4 times, this president went 6 times, or whatever.
They didn't go anywhere. They stayed in their office, right? So yeah.
They went to Dover and they witnessed it.
Good. Fair enough.
But I did it 107 times. Yeah. And if you put Presidents Obama, Trump, Biden, and Trump again, if you put all their visits to combine, I'm pretty sure it's less than 10, less than a dozen for sure. And they've got, and you've got people that were there in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, when it was really busy, that were on that ramp every single day for months doing that. Like I said, I was there 4 months. I did it 107 times. But there were people that were longer than me that did it more, that did it even more. And so, it shouldn't be about, leaders and staffers and us, how many times we did it. It's every single one is an independent event. And it's about that soldier, that sailor, that airman, that marine, and that person's family. And we really have gotten away from that.
And I think words are good, but it should be followed by actions too, that they should show the appreciation through actions. And I think there's not enough from, again, my impression that I get.
Yeah. And that's kind of one thing in talking to my marketing and publicity folks about my books. A lot of people, just like you asked me, you asked me to come on. A lot of people want to know my feelings about things like that, having been on the ramp so much at Dover. One of the most unique experiences I had, if your viewers and listeners and your followers remember the movie 0 Dark 30, In the movie Zero Dark 30, it portrayed the suicide bombing at Camp Chapman in Afghanistan that killed 7 CIA officers. That happened when I was at Dover. And so I was part of that team that welcomed is not the right word, that received the remains of those people, hosted the families, hosted all the dignitaries. There was no public media there, but as a public affairs officer, I did the same thing because they wanted to broadcast the dignified transfers back to the CIA headquarters. So we set it up. We set up their cameras and their people kind of the same way as if we had done it for a TV station, except we gave them more access and we gave them different camera angles and a lot of stuff like that so that they could broadcast that back to CIA headquarters. But that was the 7 CIA officers. And at the time, it wasn't released, but now the name of all those people is quite well known. Some of them were actual CIA employees. Some of them were contractors. There were 2 women. One of them was a mother. I don't know if the other woman was a mother, but if you remember the movie, the actress Jennifer Ely played that role of that officer, and that was based on Jennifer Matthews, who was the station chief there. In her death, she was criticized by some for not being more careful or not. And maybe she should have done things differently. I don't know. All I know is that when I was on the ramp by her, standing within 10 feet of her husband and family and children and parents, I wasn't thinking about anything but that what can we do to help that family get through this day? And the next day, her husband and her oldest child or daughter came to the mortuary, and I just happened to be at the front of the mortuary facility when her husband and daughter got there. And so he said his name, and I knew who he was based on her, just knowing her name. And he handed me a shopping type bag, and said, "This is the dress my daughter wants her mother to be buried in." And I delivered that to the female mortuary mortuary worker that was going to dress her for, her body to be returned to her family. And at the time, I just thought, well, that was unique or coincidental. I look back on it and I think, like, man, what a place to be. I mean, on the ramp out there, I looked behind me and Leon Panetta was walking to get in his spot. He at the time was the director of the CIA. I didn't know that much about him. I knew who he was. I knew he had been, I think he was in Congress. I know he was the chief of staff in the Clinton administration. He was the White House chief of staff. Then he was the CIA director, and I spoke to him very briefly that day. And then 3 years later, on my second Afghanistan deployment, I'm in the headquarters, and he's there, and as the Secretary of Defense, and I shake hands with him again.
So I love it when I'm a film buff, and I love it when movies get it right. And so the instances that you talk about where it really connects with the events, where you say, I was there and this was similar to the experience I had, I applaud that. And I think that's really wonderful. It's because there are also movies that distort things, and those anger us even more because that's not what happened. So it's so nice when they get at least the emotion and feelings behind it right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really confirm or, talking about really the accuracy of Zero Dark 30 so much, but it was pretty accurate that, it depicted 7 CIA officers killed by a suicide bomber, and that was thunder. Wow. Okay. But anyway, I'm inside and safe, so it's fine, but that was thunder. So they got that pretty much right, I think. I mean, I know that those 7 CIA officers were killed by a suicide bomber at Camp Chapman. It just happened to happen when I was at Dover Air Force Base at the mortuary. I was sitting in the office on New Year's Day, 2010, and my boss comes in and says, come to the conference room. And I go to the conference room, and in walk, like a dozen CIA officers and agents. And I remember she said, don't call them agents, call them officers. That's why I always use that term. But, they walked and they said, we lost 7 people, and they're coming, their bodies will be coming here to Dover in a few days, and we need to get prepared for that. So, I just happened to be there. I just happened to be there, when I happened to be on the ramp when their remains came back. The reason I had a real wow, we're having a big thunderstorm. The reason I had a kind of a big role in the setup of that is because as the PAO, I was always the one on the ramp, and I set up an area for the media. I set up the family area. I use stands and stanchions and all this to separate the media from the families. And the bus, I parked the bus. Basically, I kind of marshaled in the bus that had the family, and I always parked in between the media and the family members. And so we kind of did the same thing. So my bosses said, just kind of basically set it up the same way, set it up for a big family area, make sure you have room for the buses, and you park the buses, put stanchions out where we can get all the family members there, and we have some other stanchions and ropes and stuff for all the CIA employees. They were all just back in the passenger terminal, and employees just walked out there as I don't know, several hundred meters. They just pretty much walked from the passenger terminal, and then the families came in on buses. And we escorted them to the place just about, kind of like we would do, we had done for dozens of other dignified transfers. And of course, we had a lot of, in addition to CIA Director Leon Panetta, we had a number of 4-star generals. The Director of National Security was there. I think the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs might have been there. Pretty sure he was there. A couple other 4-star generals. So there was some high-ranking people there. It was really cold. It was January 4th, somewhere around there. Really windy. It wasn't. It was 25 or 30 degrees, not sub-zero, but the wind was blowing like crazy. So it felt like it was, in the teens or single digits. And we were trying to park the buses to shield the families from the wind as much as we can. Just all of that. It just seemed that it was just us doing our everyday jobs out there, but we weren't. We were doing, we were bringing back, I think, probably what was the biggest loss of life for the CIA, maybe in the history of the agency. I know it was some kind of record for them, or some kind of it was a lot for them to lose, 7 or 8 officers in one event.
And why did you turn to writing? Is that something that you always liked before, or is it something you've discovered? And I've had various psychotherapists who talked here about writing and how they deal with their own trauma, and they recommend, again, journaling or writing about the experiences. And so what was the path for you to get to the writing, and how did it help with, again, processing some of those feelings?
Yes, so going all the way back to this troubled ground and my first Afghanistan deployment, then being at Dover, then Afghanistan deployment again, then retiring. After I retired, I went through what a lot of people go through, self-doubt, wondering what I was going to do with the rest of my life as my 29-year-old military career ends and I'm 53 years old. And then so I went to a lot of therapy. The VA had some really good therapists and counselors, and I unloaded on a lot of stuff, and then I did the documentary, and then it was this Troubled Ground came out 10 years after I'd retired. I had been writing, journaling, remembering. Is it going to be a memoir? Is it going to be a novel? Is it going to be a series of magazine articles? How am I going to tell this story that I originally just wanted to tell my family, what kind of experiences I had gone through. And so it eventually, it eventually became an autobiographical novel. And yes, that was, I mean, I guess I might still be in therapy, but in a way, I mean, metaphorically, but that was sort of the culmination of 10 years of post-military career therapy, was telling that story. And now I get to talk about it. And I realized, as a PAO, public affairs officer, my job was to tell our unit's story, or tell other people's stories, tell about, the marvelous individual accomplishments of some of our unit members. I did documentaries. I did the history of the South Carolina National Guard. I did the history of the South Carolina, Air National Guard, Army National Guard. I did Bringing the Fallen Home. I did a lot of documentaries, and that's what I was doing. I was telling the stories. And then when I was about to publish the book, and then especially when I went and started talking to groups and stuff, I realized, I got a pretty interesting story myself. I mean, I own Forrest Gump type moments.
Yeah.
Where I just showed up where I was supposed to show up one day, and, boom, I'm right in the middle of some kind of, big historical event. I mean, this, the thing with the CIA and the fact that was such a big, it was a controversy, a lot of conflict, a lot of accusations about why it happened, how it happened. And I was just like right in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And then a big movie got made by a bunch of Oscar winning, writers and screenwriters and directors and actors and some of the events of that movie I had been part of in a roundabout, indirect way.
Yes. So I want to give you double thanks here. Thank you for your service, but even more importantly, thank you for talking about it. I think that again helps telling these stories. I think that is very important. As I was looking at your book, and I got suggestions. It says you may also be interested in Dr. Zhivago and Love in the Time of Cholera. So that's pretty good company there.
I know what both of those books are about. I don't know if I've read them. I mean, I know Dr. Zhivago is isn't it a historical Russian, like from the Russian Revolution?
I just remember the movie, yeah. Yeah.
I remember the movie, but I can't remember the background. Seems like it was from like the I don't know, the Russian Revolution or World War I or something.
Those are great pieces of literature, and I want to include there your novel Last Day on the Blue Wonder. Thank you so much, Les Carroll, for being here with us on Arash's World, and all the very best to you.
Thank you. Thank you.